good afternoon. So this is Maria Chierichetti. I'm an assistant professor in aerospace engineering. And I've joined a couple of years ago, and I've been a faculty member at other institutions before that for about 9 years from now. So what we did last fall is that we decided that we were going to, I decided that we were going to implement competency-based learning in one of my upper division classes. And what happened is that after we decided that, got some funding, COVID hit and I got on leave in the fall. And so what happened is that Joseph Rodriguez, who was the part-time lecturer that substituted me, implemented the strategy that I had thought, and we kept comparing and cross notes, and basically I mentored him in what I knew about mastery learning and competency-based learning so that he could implement it in the class. And so we worked as a team to make that possible. All the discussion and results, we'll present them in a paper in July at the ASAE forum. So if you're interested, once the paper is finalized, I'll be happy to share it. Okay, so sorry, my present. Okay, so what the outline of my presentation today is some discussion about why I decided that it was going to be helpful to convert this class, which is called AE112, to competency-based learning. And after I thought that that was going to be a helpful methodology, how I converted it, and which strategies I used, and which aspects of the class I changed, and which aspects I did not change. We did also some surveys on the students at the end of the semester to see how they experienced, what was their perspective on the new, on the changes in pedagogy. And we did some analysis on the effects on the grades as well. So first thing first, what is the class we're talking about? So it's one of the first classes that our students take in aerospace engineering. It's a 4-unit class. It's a junior class, so it's upper division. We just between 60 and 100 students on average, depending on a year. And some years we offer one section, and some years we offer 2 sections, depending on the enrollment. And the topics that that the class focuses on is an introduction to statics and strength of material applied to aerospace system. There is a lot that is concentrated in this class. So this class results in a very fast pace. And as typical in statics and strength of material, we start from very introductory topics like equilibrium, and then we build on that, and all the topics really build on each other. The class is usually characterized with pretty high failing rates. In 2019, it was about 20%. And depending on a year to year, we also see some pretty large equity gaps. To help the students succeed in the class, 2 years ago, we started offering optional practice workshops, which is a 1-unit extra class in which students can solve extra problems with an instructor. And up to now, it has been a voluntary class, and we're looking at making it required for students with which are either retaking the class or may have failed a number of prerequisites. But there is this additional workshop that the students can use to get some extra practice. So what I noticed about this class when I taught it in 2019, and again, it was the first time I taught this class, but in the past I had taught very similar classes in statics and strength of materials at other institutions. And what I noticed is that some students had difficulties in grasping some fundamental concepts that we discussed at the beginning of the semester. An example was on how we compute moments and moment arm, and we multiplied to a force. But then the class naturally moves on to more complex topics. We add topics, we add concepts. And for example, we start looking at the equilibrium equations of rigid bodies, but the students still don't have a clear understanding of the previous fundamental concepts. So they understand how they can write equilibrium equations, but then when they have to write the moments, they don't know how to do it. So the results of that is that students were unable to tackle more complex problems, not because they didn't understand the new concept, but because they were lacking the previous concept understanding. So it was almost like a house, a series of building blocks that build the class, and then you took one concept away and then everything collapsed. Some topics were able to stand by itself, and some students were able to progress somehow, but they had these roadblocks and they couldn't really get to the end and have a successful learning experience because they were missing those fundamental concepts. So what I thought about was whether it would be helpful to change the grading structure. And as I was thinking about it, I went to a seminar offered by Nicole Okamoto from mechanical engineering, in which she discussed how she had implemented competency-based learning in her thermodynamics class the previous semester. And what I've started reflecting was how to move from a traditional grading and assessment system to a system in which competencies were preferred with respect to moving through the entire class at a fast pace. So what I had traditionally done in my classes is that I usually assessed and graded students on how well they learn each topic. So my class had a series of assessments throughout the semester that culminated with the midterms and the finals. I assigned some problems, and then as usual, we give points to each problem and we make averages and weighted averages at the end of the class. So some students may not know all the topics, but they may know some of the topics very well, and they can move on, they can pass the class. So what I saw is that traditionally I can still pass the students because they have a sufficient average to pass the class, but they might have not really grasped some of the fundamental concepts. So I decided that I wanted to change that, and I wanted to assess students on how many topics they learned well. So I wanted to make sure that at least the important concepts in the class that were needed for the future classes that they were taking, that they knew them very well and they had very solid understanding of the concepts, they could tackle problems. And I wanted to make sure that students were able to engage with more complex topics only when they had mastered those prerequisite fundamental topics. And so the way I wanted to do it is to place some roadblocks during the class, and to make sure that students could not progress to a more complex topic if they had not passed the roadblock. So just to give you a quick understanding of competency-based learning, which is often also called mastery learning or self-paced learning. The main feature of this pedagogy is to use time flexibility and to use that to improve students' learning. So we are starting from the understanding that different students might need different amount of time to grasp and understand some topics. And it focuses on some very measurable outcomes and that the students need to master to be able to move along the class. And has as a core the fact that students can engage with complex topics only after they master the prerequisites. And if I did some research, and what the literature suggests and has measured is that this pedagogy is mostly beneficial for a diverse student body because it promotes individualized learning, and it makes sure that all the students, have mastered the fundamental skills that the instructor defines. And so I'm sure that when students move on to another class, that some fundamental skills are required and they can move on to the following classes. And it also has been shown that it improves students' habits. And we'll see how that is possible. And since students learn to study better, and that has also been seen as improving students' retention. The approach is based on a concept of retakes. So students hit a roadblock, they cannot pass it, and then I gave them the opportunity of re-engaging with the roadblock until they pass it successfully. So in terms of grading system, this is the structure, the grading structure that I used in the past. I have very frequent assessment. This was before using competency-based learning. I had weekly quizzes. The reason for having those is that the homeworks for my textbook are all published online. So most of the students have access to the solution manual, which means that half of the class copies the homework. And so I wanted to make sure that students were actually doing the homework. I had a weekly quiz the day the homework was due to make sure that the student had learned to solve the problems that were assigned. And then I had the traditional 2 midterms final exams. The class is also a service learning class, so I had a service learning experience and a couple of labs. So there are a lot of aspects packed into the class. The changes I decided to make was in the structure of the quizzes. So instead of having weekly quizzes and then midterms and finals, and that students had to progress through them just one at a time and moving, I decided to offer only 10 quizzes, which is not weekly, but almost. And then each quiz is aligned with one of the topic that topic or module that I had defined for my class. And students could move on to a following quiz only if they had passed all the previous quizzes. And so I had these roadblocks, and students could not move on to the next quiz until they had passed everything that was behind them. And then I gave a final exam, a homework. We couldn't do service learning or labs because we were online in fall 2020. And I kept the structure for the final exam and the homework and research paper. What I really changed was the quizzes and how I structured them. So on the right side of the slide, you see how I divided my class into 10 topics and how they are aligned with my class learning objectives or outcomes. So you see I have identified 10 topics, which are subdivided in 3 groups. So I have a group of preliminary topics, a group of required topics, and a group of supplementary topics. And this division allowed me to decide how the grade of the student was going to be. Because for me, what happened is that if students were allowed to pass all the first 7 topics, so the preliminary and required topics, they were going to be allowed to pass the quizzes and basically pass the class. If students passed less than 7 topics, they didn't have a passing grade. And if they passed more than 7 topics, their grade was going to improve. So my grading system was not based on the percentage of the grade that they got on a quiz, but on the number of quizzes that they passed. So just to give an example, in my mind, passing 7 quizzes corresponded to a C, passing 8 quizzes corresponding to a B, and 9 or 10 quizzes corresponded to an A. The way I divided the topics and divided them in preliminary, required, supplementary, and decided where my basic standard was going to be was based on the follow-up classes. So I looked at the follow-up class that I usually also teach, so I know very well what I need the students to know for the class, and made sure that all the fundamental aspects were covered by passing this 112 class. And again, every time a student passed the quiz, they were allowed the following week or 10 days afterwards to move on to the next topic. If students did not pass the quiz, they had to retake that assessment until they were able to pass it. So the quizzes for me are very quick assessment. Again, they are very frequent, and they are based on problems, on modified problems that students have had occasions to tackle before. So I didn't give them a lot of opportunities to try and retry. So the quiz were either 1 or 2 questions on the topic, and I gave usually 15-20 minutes to solve the quiz. I had to handle retakes. So if a quiz was not passed, students could retake the quiz the following week, the following time that the quizzes were offered. And we started offering quizzes on week 2. And then for the rest of the semester, students had to either move on to the next quiz or retake the previous quiz. So let's say I offer for the first time quiz 3 on Wednesday. The students that had passed quiz 1 and quiz 2 that Wednesday could take quiz 3, and the students that had not passed the previous quizzes had to take the previous quiz. So if a student had passed quiz 1, on that Wednesday, they were going to be taking quiz 2, and so on and so forth. And I also decided to change the way I was grading each quiz because there is a massive amount of grading and assessments using this strategy, because students can retake multiple quizzes multiple times. And not only we had to come up with different quizzes for each week, but we also had to grade them all. And we had to do it in a fairly quick way because students needed to know whether they had passed the quiz or not, so that they knew whether they could move on or whether they had to practice again. So I decided to change the grading scheme to allow us to have a more a quicker way of grading, but also more meaningful, and I would say also a little bit stricter. So the grading scheme was either pass or no pass. Students didn't get any partial credit on the quiz, and we were just looking at the number of major conceptual mistakes that students made. So for this offering, for this year, for fall 2020, we decided that we allowed 2 major mistakes in the solution for students to pass the quiz. Otherwise, students would not pass it. I'm thinking in the future to even make it more restrictive, but this is what we started from. So if there was any couple of major mistakes, that was about it. We looked at the main equations, at the process, whether the equations were all correctly written. We decided that for this class, going through the details of the algebra, the sign mistakes, that was not worth our time. And that in this grading strategy was not even necessary. During the last week of the semester, due to some issues that happened toward the end of the semester, we decided to open up some of the last topics for students to take quizzes. And so the last quiz of the semester, if students had passed at least 7 topics, we let them try the quizzes for topic 8, 9, and 10 after the final exam. And this was just a practical decision. We had a lot of issues after personal issues between the instructors after Thanksgiving. And so we had to make sure that students were given the option of earning their grades because of the delays in grading and feedback to the students. So this is how the student progression was at the end of the semester. So R7, it's topic number 7. So on the x-axis, you see each topic. And then on the y-axis, you see the percentage of students that pass that topic by the end of the semester. And we see that 81% of the students passed topic number 7. And then there were a few more students that passed topic 8, 9, and 10. And again, you see a disproportion on the number of quizzes passed on the number of students that passed quiz 10, because quiz 8, 9, and 10 at the end were open up to all the students that basically passed the class. And again, 81% of the students passing all the 7 topics for this class was a pretty good achievement for what we were used to have. And again, for topics 8, 9, and 10, we were comfortable in opening up all the topics together, because if you look at the topics, they're not intertwined too much, they're not coupled too much. So we were comfortable that if students were not too familiar with topic 8, they could still work on topic number 10, because those 3 topics were almost independent on each other. We decided to compare the grade distribution at the end of the semester. So you see in blue, we see the fall 2019 class in which I implemented the traditional grading system. And then in red, we have the competency-based or mastery learning pedagogy. And what we noticed is what we had noticed in the literature as well, that the approach doesn't really change the number of A and B students, but it does influence the students that struggle the most. It allows the continuous practice during the semester, allows more students to grasp those fundamental concepts. And so we had less students that actually failed the class, even if the number of A's and B's was not really affected. We did, again, in the literature analysis that I did, I found that this was a very common result, that the number of A and B's was not really changed, but the group of students that was affected the most were the students on the weaker students. And I think that Nicole observed the same result when she offered the class this way. I also wanted to make a couple of notes, because fall in 2019 and fall 2020 were offered by 2 different instructors as well. And we worked very closely. In 2020, the same material that I used in 2019 was used. The only differences were the actual quiz and final exam questions. But the other big change that happened was COVID. So in 2020, the class was offered online, while in 2019, we were in person. So I think that it is not fair to say that these results are due only to the change in pedagogy, because there were other factors. At the same time, the fact that the A's and B's did not really change between the semesters make me comfortable in saying that this is a common aspect that has been seen with competency-based learning. So these results are very much in line with what other instructors have observed. Being in an online environment, I would expect it more students to have problems. So I would have expected less A's, less B's, and less C's. So my take out of this graph is that probably the competency-based positive aspect conflicted a bit with the difficulties of the online environment that we have experienced. Plus the fact of having online learning was helpful in organizing when students were taking retakes, was providing more help in having an individualized learning curve. We also did some studies on the effects on different students groups, because again, in the literature, we had noticed that there was this expectation that this approach was affecting more students belonging to underrepresented groups. So we noticed that when we did a statistical comparison of the two class offerings, there was a statistical difference between the two groups of students of fall 2020 and fall 2019, but we did not notice a statistical significance between different students of different genders or students of different races. So we noticed that the beneficial effect was overall to the entire class and group of students, but we didn't find any specific group of students to have had specific benefits out of this. At the end of the semester, we also surveyed the students to see what was their perspective, trying to understand both what they thought about their learning experience, but also and their practical learning and mastery of concepts, but also how they found this competency-based or mastery learning pedagogy, whether it was difficult to keep track of grades and how was the effect on their learning habits, stress, and so forth. So we had two multiple choice questions, Likert type of questions, in which we asked students to rate how the modular quiz used in the class was with respect to a traditional teaching approach. And we see in blue and red very positive responses. The neutral responses, the orange, and then the green and purple responses are the negative responses. And I've been happy to say that most of the students either really liked the approach or were neutral about it. Very few students had a negative experience, overall negative experience. And in terms of their perception of what they learned, we asked the question, do you feel like you have gained the skills being taught in the class? And we had the positive in blue, the middle ground in red and orange, and the negative aspects in green. And so I've been also very encouraged by the fact that most of the students feel that they have learned the material well. We also asked two open-ended questions that we analyzed to look for common themes. One question asked them to list one positive aspect of this modular quiz approach. And then the second question asked for a negative, a negative aspect of the approach. And the three main themes that we found recurring in the responses was that the approach allows for room for error because of the retakes. It makes for a stress-free learning environment, and also that the timely feedback is a key aspect of the approach. And to go a little more in depth about what the students said, we noticed that the quiz retakes were rated by the student as allowing more mastery of the topics and better engagement, and that this repeated opportunity allowed them to learn from their mistakes without having fear of failure. And as a result, students mentioned that they can focus, they can learn and understand the material in depth. One of the quotes that I really like from the students is the first one that says, knowing that I have a chance to go over my mistakes with the professor and get another chance to take the quiz makes me able to focus more on the material and allows me to perform better. I think we all agree that we don't grade our students because it's fun or because we love grading or we love giving them exams, but because we want to make sure that they are learning, and we need to make sure that they are learning. And the fact that they have this option of learning not only from a past quiz, but also from a non-pass quiz, because they have to retake it. So they have to learn what they did wrong. It's an incredible learning experience for them. Some other aspects that we identified is that the quiz retakes encourage learning. Because it helps them learn where they went wrong, and they not really guess where they went wrong, because they clearly see which topic, they clearly know which topic they are struggling with, and they know what they need to practice on. One student even recommended that the approach is used in other classes, which was very encouraging for us. Some students had a slightly different experience, as it is common over 100 students. And they had the feeling that if they didn't use all the material throughout the class, they had difficulties in recalling the information. I haven't been worried about this feeling, because I know that to pass some topics, they need to know well the previous topics and they need to apply them. So even if they have the perception that they can forget about the previous topics because they are not specifically assessed on them again, I know that to assess them on following topics, they have to use those previous materials. So it is just a perception that they can forget about previous topics, because I know that they need those topics to solve the more complex problems. I was also very encouraged because many students mentioned that it authored for a reduced stress learning experience, which was an impressive statement to say during COVID and online learning, in which a lot of students were really stressed out and had a lot of personal difficulties. So they indicated that the approach is less intimidating, and with this, they experienced less stress, they were encouraged to learn, and this resulted in an increased confidence level. And students also felt more prepared attempting the assessment because they knew they had the knowledge to answer the question. And the quizzes were not as stressful as exams because it allows them to focus on the learning objective. And they also mentioned that having this lower stress level and lack of pressure to get it right the first time helped them in focusing and learn the material instead of being anxious and preoccupied about the assessment. And the fact that it's self-driven and they can really take charge of the pace of their learning made the learning more enjoyable. So one of the students mentioned that it's useful in helping the students pace themselves in the class. So it gives them more responsibility. They really need to take ownership of the pace of the class. It's not me that defines when they need to take the midterms and the final exam, but it's them that have to decide, I need to practice more because I really need to pass these quizzes. Otherwise, I'm not going to pass the class. One of the challenges that we encountered, and the students mentioned it, it's that a timely feedback is the most important aspect, because the success of the approach really relies heavily in this timely feedback from the instructor. And at the end of the semester, we experienced some delays in grading and giving feedback because of many different reasons. And some students fell behind in their learning goals, not because they were not learning appropriately, but because there was a delay in the assessment grading. And as a result, if there is a lack of timely feedback, it also creates frustration in the student. So all the positive advantages that we have mentioned about mastery learning and competency-based learning can be wiped out if there is not this timely feedback given by the prompt grading. So in concluding what I've experienced with this new pedagogy, the advantages, the positive aspect that I have noticed is that mastery of content is ensured on a pretty in-depth level for the topics that I know are fundamental. The quizzes are perceived as a way of learning the material, so it reinforces their learning is not just a way to get a grade. And students in general respond very positively. It results in higher students' achievement and creates a less stressful learning environment, thus boosting students' confidence and enjoying a more enjoyable learning experience. I've noticed that it supports the students who struggle the most, so the students that generally fail the class or get C's, while the stronger students that generally get A and B's were not affected. And the other thing that I noticed is that curving grades was not necessary because I had a no credit option, so students were either passing or not passing the quiz. So the students were completely in charge of their grade. Their grade was not depending on how other students performed in the class, which I'm a strong supporter of eliminating those curving of grades. Everybody needs to be in charge of their own grade, and that should not depend on how other students perform in the class. As an instructor, I also find helpful that you always know where your class stands, because you just need to have a very quick look at how many students pass which topic, and you know where the class is. You know where they're falling behind and which topics they have difficulties with. And you don't have to wait for your midterm to realize that students were having difficulties for the past month. Some of the disadvantages of the approach or challenges is that timely feedback is key. And so grading needs to happen at a very fast pace. My idea is that if a student takes a quiz, then either me or the grader need to have a block of time that day or the following day to grade the quizzes. Otherwise, everything falls apart. And then because of the retakes, there is an extensive assessment preparation, and that creates an additional workload for the instructor. The other challenges that I found personally is that I modified the quiz system, but I still kept the final grade and the homework and graded them as I traditionally do. And so there is a disconnect between the quiz system and the other assessments. I still believe that a final exam is necessary to make sure that students have that final assessment, that they can be, that they need to take ownership. But I think that I need to change how the grading is performed for that final exam. The other challenge that I found is the Canvas platform, because it is not very conducive to this novel grading strategy. So it is not easy to keep track, both for me and for the students, of what their final grade will be, because I'm not giving percentages in the class on the quizzes. I'm just giving pass, no pass, and then I have roadblock. So it's a little bit of a challenge to keep track of where each student is in terms of the grade with respect to the end of the semester. So some of the ideas that I'm thinking to implement next in the fall when I'll teach the class again is that I'd like to expand this competency-based learning, which ties up also to the specification grading pedagogy, also to the other assessment in the class, to have a more streamlined grading strategy between the quizzes and the final exam and the other assessments. And in that line, to also create a grade tracking system that the students can use to determine the grade. And that first option that I have in mind is that I divide my letter grading system based not only on how many quizzes each student take. So to get a C, for example, a student would need to pass at least 7 quizzes, would need to submit, so homework complete submission, they would need to submit at least 8 homeworks, and they would need to pass at least 6 homeworks. And I'm still thinking about the homeworks because I know that the solution manual is available to most of them. So I still need to finalize this, but this is the idea I'm moving forward. And then to get a C and pass the class, students need to get a passing grade on 2 out of 3 lab reports, but they need to submit them all. And then they need to have at least a 75% grade in the final exam. So the idea behind this is to have a general grading strategy that is in line with this modular approach in the quizzes, so that I don't have to get back into the practice of weighting the grades on each assessment and plugging them all together in a big math formula. I also want to avoid having to argue with each student on how much points I'm taking out of a problem because they missed a sign or they didn't use the units. Having this pass, no pass, or no partial credit option basically eliminates all the need to discuss about those half points that I'm taking off and that students might not agree. And we all know that it doesn't change their grade at the end. And some other things that I'm thinking of implementing in the future is to implement a system in which students can retake the quizzes only if they have practice a little bit more, so that the retake is not free for everyone. I want to avoid students retaking quizzes just to try them out. So what I'm considering, I have a few ideas in mind, but one option is to use a token system in which students need to earn the possibility of retaking the exam by submitting additional work, which could be the correction of the quiz that they didn't pass, or maybe some extra problems. And then I also would like to create some kind of automated grading option, either through Canvas or through well spelled out rubrics that would help me grading efficiently and without increasing my grading time excessively. I wanted to thank everybody to be here today. And if you'd like some more information, I know some of you have participated in the Mastery Learning seminars. So there are weekly seminars on Wednesdays, and there will be also the summer boot camp. I'll be one of the peer coach for the program since I have implemented the strategy already. And thank you for being here today.